Just as I was about to go live with this video, Nikon has indeed dropped firmware 1.5 for the Z6 II and the Z7 II. This is absolutely great news to see they continue to work on things for these cameras, but these are small updates. So the rest of this video remains completely relevant. G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. Today we are myth busting. Yes, indeed we are. There has been a long-held view among certain quarters that the Z6 II and the Z7 II, with their second Expeed processor, that's 2 times Expeed6, have not exactly lived up to the expectations that were expected. Look, I am. I own 2 Z6s. There's one right there, and there's one right there that we've been shooting on. I've been shooting on that camera for, I don't know, something like 4 years almost. And I own a Z6 II as well, so I am right in the middle of this conversation. I still use all of these cameras all the time. Love them. From my perspective, I'm never left wanting. They all just fit in certain parts of my different use cases for all the different types of photography and videography that I do. But it's fair enough. This one here has a second processor in it, a second Expeed6. And, well, a lot of us have wondered, what does that second processor do? So for the last year or so, as the Z6 has been improved, as it was in October last year, probably the single largest fundamental improvement was that 3.4 update that came in October last year, making this camera seem pretty spectacular. And it made also us Z6 II owners go, well, what's going on here with the Z6 II? Now, time keeps passing, the Z9 keeps getting better, and this week we've had updates for so many of the Z series cameras, which includes the Z50, the Z5, the Z6, the Z7, the Z9, and the D850. They've all had firmware updates this week. Now, the Z6 II did have a firmware update. What does that second processor do? Now, I've thought to myself, not knowing what's going on, I've got a few theories. Now, the first theory I have is, well, Nikon have improved the Z6 and the Z7 a heap. They continue to improve the Z9 a heap, and there's little improvements here and there with all of the other cameras. So, personally, I don't think they're holding back on us. I don't think they're forgetting us. I don't think they're deliberately doing this. I think this is driven by the technology in these cameras. That's what I think. So I decided to explore that line. What is it about the technology, and what's the technology actually up to? So I thought I'd do a good old-fashioned stat comparison. And lo and behold, there's some stats in there that probably a lot of us have forgotten, where this camera does quite a lot more than this camera in certain circumstances. And when you put all those things together, which is how cameras work, you know, they're focusing in the dark, they're shooting faster, blah, blah, blah. When you put all these things together, you can understand what that second Expeed processor is up to. And it's busy doing all of those new things. So anyway, today I wanted to bust that myth, or not, as to whether we think those extra things that the Expeed6 is doing in the Z6 II and the Z7 II, and does it answer the question as to what's going on with that second processor? All right, let's look at the stats. And we're trying to myth bust here. We're trying to really understand, where is that second Expeed processor? Where are those processors going? What are they doing? Looking at this chart, which I haven't looked at for ages, since it came out, I think we can see it here. But let's bust this myth together. Let's have fun. Yes, indeed, we've got the Expeed6 and the dual Expeed6. That's the difference. That's what we've all been talking about. And the first change is an improvement in the refresh rate of the Z6 II. Now, unless you own a Z6 and a Z6 II, this is the sort of thing that Z6 or Z7 II users are simply not going to even know is there or exists. This certainly uses more processing power to send more information to the EVF. How much of a refresh rate improvement it is, but it usually tends to be doubling. There is already some of your second processor going into that. Next one is we have EVF Improved Viewfinder Blackout. I think what that means is it's quicker. The blackout is faster. So again, you've got to get information back to the EVF quicker than you did it before. Again, it's going to take some of that second processor. One of the biggest gripes of the Z6 from so many quarters, except for those people that loved and used them, was the fact that there was only one card slot. It's arguable that writing to 2 card slots might take a little bit of extra overhead. So that's worth considering right there. Might not be a lot, might be 1%, 2%, 5%, who knows? You got to think about it, you got to talk to it, you got to do it. Especially perhaps if you're splitting RAW and JPEG in 2 separate directions. There might be a little bit of extra handshaking that has to go on in those sorts of situations. Now, I think this is a really important one. We've got 12 frames per second versus 14 frames per second. Now, 2 frames per second doesn't seem like much. It is going 1/6 faster. That's an increase just below 20% in frame rate. You've got to still run your exposure, you've got to run your focusing, you've got to run all that stuff faster in order to do that 14 frames per second. So that is from my opinion, when you're carving up that second processor and what it's working on, let's just say it's 100 cycles in one and 100 cycles in the other one. Well, this process alone could be taking almost 20% of those available cycles. That's a lot of your processor already gone in giving you faster frame rates. And by way of that, it's actually giving you faster focus. Just think about that. Everything is happening faster, which probably thus hits the camera harder than 20% increase on the CPU. Camera buffer. Now, I don't know whether this would hit the processor because the buffer could physically just be bigger, but it could well be that as the processor is running data through it, it's got a limit before it just kind of needs to stop and take a break. So some of this might hit the second processor as well. It's hard to say, but we have got a buffer that's 35 frames deep versus a buffer that's 124 frames deep. Again, this is a significant increase. It is a 3.5 times increase. This one here, this is an advantage of the camera. I'd be hard pressed to think that the processor has much say in whether your shutter is open for 30 seconds or 900 seconds. So we'll just leave that one to one side. I also think this one right here is another profound one. Low light sensitivity. It is minus 3.5 in the Z6 and it is minus 4.5 in the Z6 II. Now, we're talking a whole stops difference. That means there is half as much light in the scene and you will get the same outcome. The way I kind of think about these things is the darker it gets, the less contrast there is and the less color there is, which is the two things that happen as it gets darker. It is significantly more difficult for a camera to focus. This single advancement, a whole doubling of the camera's sensitivity to be able to see in the dark, this potentially has a great hit on that second processor. In wide area AF, we now have eye detect. Z6 doesn't have it, the Z6 II does. Firstly, the camera's got to see it, understand it's there, and then obviously it's drawing this extra box, which is potentially more fine-grained, and so there is harder work to do there. Now, we don't know whether that box, the Z6 already understands that the eye is there and it's working away with the eye and it's just not displaying it. We don't know whether it's just a display thing or whether there is actually just a little bit higher degree of accuracy. And animal detect. Animal detect is something that the Z6 does not have. Now, why does the Z6 II have it? It's got those extra processors. So does that have something to do with it? Who knows? But it's here. And then another one that's a big one. On the Z6, there is no IAF in video. Does not exist at all. On the Z6 II, we get it. That's obviously got nothing to do with the stills side of things, but when you're shooting video, you can see how this would have a greater impact on the machine's processor. Another huge one, and this is sort of, but not quite, doubling the capacity of the camera. Because there's a crop, they're not having to subsample, but you are running data at twice the speed. We've gone from 4K 30 to 4K 60. And this is twice as much data that you've got to move and land on your storage media. There's just not the same downsampling that goes on in this version, but that's only taking one step out of that whole process. Just in video alone, you could see that 4K 60 would be using most of what the second processor has got to give. Add on top of that, we have now IAF in video. You can see there's an advantage here in the battery life, but that is simply to do with the fact that it is a battery that stores more energy in it. Battery density keeps improving. I doubt that continuous external power and USB power and transfer has very much to do with the main CPU, but a great advantage that the Z6 II have over the Z6 is that you can feed it power at the same time as shooting. The original Z6 and Z7, you can charge them, but the camera has to be off to charge the battery over USB-C. There's the hard data. Look, I think it's really interesting, and when we look across some of these things, especially when we're looking in stills and we're talking about a faster EVF, faster blackout times, writing to 2 cards, doubling the capacity for the camera to work in even lower light, IAF in wide area AF, 14 frames per second versus 12 frames per second, and the fact that the buffer can last 3.5 times longer. You put all of that load onto that second processor and you can see where it's all going. And if we look at Nikon's website, they do actually say the AF is a bit faster. And I've looked at a couple of videos across the internet, including one by Frames TM, and he actually shows that the hit rate when tracking with a Z6 versus a Z6 II after the 3.4 firmware updates, that's the major one, that's the biggest one we've ever seen happening to the original Z6 and Z7, that the Z6 II was still faster and got a higher hit rate, a significantly higher hit rate when tracking. The AF is better, and it's got to do all of this extra stuff. I personally can quite reasonably see what all of that second processor is doing. I think if there is going to be anything more, it is going to be minor at this point because of all the advancements we can see between these two cameras here in black and white, or in this case, and yellow as well. Back to me. All right, well, we've looked at the stats, and from my perspective, understanding what I do about computer science, which is minimal, but I do understand a little bit about it, yes, indeed, I can see where most of that processor is going. The EVF is running faster, and it's probably running twice as fast because that's what they tend to do. It might have gone from 60 hertz to 120 hertz, or 30 hertz to 60 hertz, or 25 hertz to 50 hertz. But that is double the information. That's a lot of overhead. And of course, we can see that the focus system can see in the dark. It can see in half as much light, going from minus 3.5 EVF to minus 4.5 EVF. Now, I think that's a pretty big effort to be able to see into the dark better. This one here, it shoots at 12 frames per second, and this one at 14 frames per second. Now, 2 frames per second doesn't sound like a lot, but that is almost a 20% increase in speed. There are other focus advancements, including eye detect and the ability of drawing that eye detect box, and more. You put all of these things together, and you can see, from my perspective, where that second processor is going. For me, and we're all different and we can all analyze this ourselves, there might be a little bit more wriggle room left in the Expeed6 number 2, but based on what I've reminded myself of, I can't see a lot there. Definitely the notion that the logic and how a Z9 works flowing down into a Z6 II, I just don't see it happening. These are completely different generations of chip. It's clear that the Expeed6 just simply was not designed for what the Z9 can do, and we know that on the launch of the Z9, Nikon told us formally that the Z9 processor, the Expeed6, was 10 times faster than the two processors in the Z7 II. That is just significantly more computing power. Not only do I think the architecture of the chips between the Expeed6 and the Expeed7 are just completely different. I suspect there are way more cores in an Expeed7, probably dedicated cores like you see in an Apple computer. There is a lot of little incremental increases, and that all adds up to that processor, that second processor, being busy. Again, this is me just theorizing. Anything could happen. Who knows? Like who knows? Maybe they'll work out how to squeeze more out of it, but I can certainly see where a lot of it is going at this point in time. Anyway, this is just an information break for me, because I've got a Z6 and a Z6 II. I can see the differences. I can see them on paper. I can see them in the camera. This is definitely a superior camera. It is. It actually does quite a lot of things more and better and faster and more in the dark. All that. At the end of the day, the Z6 and the Z6 II continue to be great cameras. We've looked at a lot of specs today, but the thing about what Nikon does is we have these great sensors, we have this great color science, we have these amazing RAW files, we have gorgeous ergonomics, we have build quality that lasts, and these cameras just keep going and going. Hobbyist, enthusiast, or professional, whether you're shooting portraits, landscapes, models, architecture, your family, out in the wilderness, these cameras are still so applicable to so many situations, delivering one of the best 24 megapixel sensors ever made, along with the great video qualities that come with this camera, really robust and useful 4K. There are still so many use cases where these are relevant. And let's not forget to reiterate, this is the previous generation of processor. We now have both Canon and Sony in their mid-level cameras using their next generation processors. So when Nikon bring the Expeed6 to their mid-tier cameras, we're really going to see something special, and it will be a massive step. And for those of you that need that massive step, well, I do believe you will need the new processor. From my perspective, Mythbusted. Now please do let me know in the comments below, do you think the myth is busted? Do you think it's semi-busted, or is it not busted at all? There's still plenty of space left in that second Expeed6 processor to be doing all sorts of other things. I would love to hear. I am open to all ideas and any ideas. Who knows what the future holds? And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. And, well, more important than anything else, get out shooting. Bye for now.